happen with the UK variant.
Let's get to my panel for more on this. Labor MP Kimberley Kitching from the Liberal Party, James Paterson, thanks both for your time. Just the story there in the US, a reminder of how different the situation is there compared to here. For all the sort of carping Labor's done on the sidelines, the country's in a good position.
It is in a good position. It's good to see the rollout happening. And I think, we want Australians to have every confidence in this vaccine, which they should. And of course, this vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, is rolling out in Israel. They're just about at 50% of their population being vaccinated. That's a pretty good test case for Australia to look at Israel to see what they're doing with the Pfizer vaccine. I do think it is a little concerning, though, Tom, when there are thousands of GPs wanting to be a part of the wanting to get accreditation, being part of the rollout, and they haven't been, they haven't really been answered. They're not in the system yet. Hopefully, that won't impact the rollout.
Well, just as a rollout that gets bigger, 80,000 in the first week, it'll end up at 800. So
we better get some more GPs.
Yeah. What did you make of the PM? So initially he wasn't going to be part of it, and then he is, and the line going out, it's about confidence. Jacinda Ardern says, let others in first. Was it a good move from him?
Look, I think that, there are people, obviously, in Australia, and we saw around the country on Saturday, anti-vaccination protests. I think that's a shame. I think we should have absolute confidence in the TGA. And I actually watched your colleague Andrew Clennell's interview with Professor John Skerritt, who is obviously, from that interview, you can just tell he's a highly trustworthy person. And I think we're lucky in this country, but being lucky doesn't mean you should be indulgent. And I think that those anti-vaxxers should really take a good, hard, long look at themselves and be a part of the program. The only way out of this pandemic... Was
the PM getting in line first helpful in that regard?
Well, I think for those anti-vaxxers who are both on the far left and the far right of politics, maybe seeing some politicians going first might be a good idea. The leader of the Labor Party is, I understand, having a vaccination later in the week. I think
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be bipartisan by that point. It's obviously a big moment for the country, but it's only the first step. This needs to be managed well for the government to get any credit for this, and if it's not managed well, there'll be some responsibility, won't there?
Tom, this is going to be one of the most complex logistical exercises that the Australian government has ever undertaken in partnership with state governments and pharmaceutical companies who are providing this vaccine. This is something that we've never done before, trying to vaccinate essentially the entire population, certainly make it available to the entire population. And in very difficult circumstances, you'd know with the Pfizer vaccine, the storage requirements to keep it stable are incredibly complex. So it's a massive undertaking, but this has been something we've been thinking about for many months now. It's been carefully planned, and I've got great confidence in the public health team that will be leading the charge.
There's been a lot of talk, though, about whether the federal government, in different elements, likes to take credit for some things. On hotel quarantine, says it's up to the states. Do you accept this is a government that will be rolled out with the states, a program will be rolled out with the states, but the federal government, whether it goes poorly or goes well, will share a big part of whatever is to be handed out after that?
Oh, we don't shy away from that at all, Tom. We are absolutely leading this process. We're doing it cooperatively with shared responsibility, obviously with all of our partners in industry and the state government, but we're leading the way. It's why the Prime Minister took the step to get the first vaccine on the weekend, and you've seen a lot of the state premiers stepping up and getting vaccinated today. I think that's a really good step. So
it's just starting, obviously, and we think hopefully within only a few short weeks we'll have aged care workers and hotel quarantine workers vaccinated. Do we all agree here we won't see states chucking up the borders, lockdowns, or if we do see it, perhaps you'll be allowed to criticise your Labor premiers if that happens?
Oh, we never do that. But I think, James and I are both in Melbourne, and, it's obviously was a pretty hard, long road last year. And I think obviously you can see in the UK, there's been real consequences there as well. They're looking at data, not dates. I think Prime Minister Boris Johnson said. So, it's been pretty good here. We'll see how it goes, how the rollout goes. I hope the rollout goes really well.
That'll be the interesting test, won't it? We get a few cases down the track. We've become a bit obsessed with zero, and it's great, but too focused on it perhaps sometimes.
It's become a bit of a festival, particularly on social media platforms like Twitter, where journalists and others engage in this donut day excitement that I think actually is setting us up for failure. That can't be the test going forward unless you want Australia's borders with the world to be closed forever, unless you want our state borders to be closed at short notice, and all the shocking ramifications that has for people on a personal level as well as for their businesses and their economic livelihood. So we have to get past that and say that once the vaccine is widely available to people, that we're going to have a different risk tolerance because the threat will be much less severe to people's health.
Maybe it's not good for our waistlines either, all this talk of donuts. Let's talk about JobMaker. So ABC obtaining information from the Treasury's own examples of this scheme. Remember, it gives incentives for workers to hire people. But according to the Treasury's own examples, it could be used to sack an older worker and hire up to 3 younger people to replace them, and the business would actually be better off. That's a worrying incentive, is it not?
Tom, if any business did that, they would be in direct contravention of the Fair Work Act. You cannot discriminate against a worker based on their age.
And how would
if
you
sack them
prove
because
the
of their age, then that would be unlawful. Well, this is something I think the government will take a very close look at. And as we have with all the other stimulus measures, the ATO and other agencies of government are going to be very closely looking at the way businesses behave, whether it's around JobKeeper or other programs, to make sure that it is used for the intended purpose. And if people are playing these sorts of games, I think it will be fairly obvious, Tom. If you see a business sack an older worker and hire 3 younger workers to do similar work, it's not going to be all that difficult to go back through the audit trail and demonstrate.
But you could say, hey, this permanent job is no longer available. We need flexibility. Here, we've got 3 casuals we're going to employ instead. Would that fall foul of the legislation?
Well, the federal government will take a very dim view of that kind of behaviour.
Dim view is fine, but would it fall foul of legislation?
Yes, it would. I mean, it is illegal to discriminate against a worker on the basis of their age. That is unlawful workplace discrimination, and they shouldn't do it.
Your views on that?
Well, I think that, this pandemic has been terrible. What we should be doing is using it to come out the other end with better jobs, more secure jobs. This looks to us, to Labor, as if this is going to create a more casualised workforce. That is not what anyone wants, and I don't think the government should want it either. And as for taking a dim view, well, we can all take a dim view about companies that, made record profits during coronavirus and then, kept all of the JobKeeper money. And I think there's been a dim view taken about that. But I think what we do need to do in JobMaker, remember the Treasurer promised that this would support 450,000 jobs. It's a $4 billion package. Treasury said at estimates late last year that in fact it would create about a tenth of that, about 45,000 jobs. So what we are going to look at this, and we will. This is a stimulus package that looks like it's failed on the government's own figures.
What was the solution in hindsight then to the issue of companies that ended up making big profit on JobKeeper? And then what are you saying should have happened?
Across the parliament, there is a view that those companies should repay that JobKeeper,
and
that should have been part of the stimulus.
But I'm asking about, wouldn't the issue be if you put a provision in there saying, by the way, if you end up going really well, we're going to claw back money? That actually hurts the company's confidence.
If you're making a record profit, you obviously didn't need JobKeeper. So
you didn't know at the time. You ultimately did.
Yeah, so they should repay it. And some companies have repaid it. Others have been far more stubborn.
All right.
But I do feel for Josh Frydenberg having to go to his Kooyong Division Liberal Party branch meetings to explain spending $4 billion when it hasn't been spent very well.
I'm sure you feel greatly for him. I just want to finish finally on Brittany Higgins. Just one aspect of this, is it no longer good enough to have this sort of one-step removed process? Political officers, Prime Minister's officers seemingly always now have someone that gets told things, and if it's too sensitive for the Prime Minister, as in it will hurt his or her career, they don't tell them. Is that sort of, approach, this arm's length, this fixer approach, should that no longer be the case?
Tom, this has obviously been a very shocking issue for everyone that works in the building, and the thing about Miss Higgins' story that most alarmed me was the fact that she said she felt that if she had pursued this criminally with charges, that it would have been detrimental for her career. I mean, every Australian is entitled to ensure that if a crime is committed against them, that the punishment follows for the perpetrator of that, and that's a profoundly disturbing thing that she felt that. So I think that's one of the key lessons out of this, that we as employers, as political bosses, have to make sure our staff understand if they want to pursue their rights in the criminal justice system, they'll be supported every step of the way, and there'll be absolutely no ramifications for them professionally, politically or in any other way.
But if the buck were to stop with the Prime Minister in that case, it's more likely that would be escalated, would it not? Do you understand?
I do understand your point, debate.
What's your view on that?
And we've got twin issues here that are slightly conflicting. One is to respect the privacy and the agency of potential victims. We can't trample on that. And the last thing I think a lot of people in this circumstance would want is gossip about them in the building that's outside their control. But also, when the law is broken, we have a real obligation for the criminal justice system to do what it needs to do.
Just briefly, and this can apply to both sides. Opposition officers are a lot bigger than they used to be, with fixes, if you like.
I think
Is that a cultural issue?
I think every single workplace in Australia should be safe. The ABS did a study on sexual assault, including in domestic violence situations, and the figures from that are shocking. I think every workplace should be safe, including in all offices in this building. There should be no way that someone feels, that they can't can't pursue their rights.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Senators, thank you. Talk again soon.